Okay, so if you're here watching this, it's because you know nothing about sanding or maybe very little about sanding and you would like to know more. So the first thing is I have my object that I'm going to sand. This is just a piece that I use for like practice glazing and stuff, and so students can see what happens when you use certain glazes. Now, I've got a few different sandpapers here. I have an 80 grit, I have a 120, a 220, a 400, and you can see that because I tore it off and I can't read what it is, I made sure to write on here that it's a 400. I have a 1500 and a 1000. Should be in that order. So whenever you're using sandpaper, you always start with the lowest number grit. And the reason you do that is because the lowest number will actually take off the most material. And since you probably are starting off with something that's got a lot of stuff on it, you probably want to start off first with something that has a lot of grit on it. Now, I guess what I'll do is I'll work on this section right here. So when you are sanding, first off, it's important to make sure that you are wearing a mask, especially if you're not wet sanding. And then you want to work in kind of a circular motion. Now this isn't the greatest sandpaper, so you can see a lot of little pieces flying off. And, well, ceramic is a very hard material. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to get rid of any of those little bumps and grooves, which is a little hard to see with this lighting, but there's quite a few little bumps and grooves. Normally on a project, you would be sanding the whole thing. But since this is a demo, I'm just showing you what it's like to sand one area. Now, if while you're sanding, you're noticing that it's really hard on your fingers, you can put something under the sandpaper that's a little bit stiffer that you can kind of use to hold your sandpaper against it. You can also use like a cloth or something wrapped in your sandpaper. And this helps to make it a little spongier so that it wraps around things a little bit better. But right now, what I'm trying to do is get rid of all of those little grooves. And you can see me working in kind of a circular pattern too. That's important. There's still a few little grooves in there. Keep working on those until they're gone. So, you know when you're ready to move on to the next level of sandpaper when all of the grooves you're seeing are just grooves created by your sandpaper. So on this here, got most of it. I could go wash it and see. Most of it is off. I am seeing seeing a few grooves and things here. And normally I would want to keep working until I've gotten rid of what I don't want to be there. But for the sake of brevity, I'm going to move on. It's a little hard to see. I don't know if you can really see it with how bright it is up on that screen. But what I'm seeing right now, if I look really closely, are these like little tiny grooves that are created by the sandpaper. Now, if I keep doing this with this, you'll continue to sand and continue to have those little grooves in it. So that's when I need to work my way up to a 120. I could even switch to a 220 at this point. One thing I want to warn you about is switching too early. You saw how much material it took off. That's a lot of removed material. If I switch to a 220, it's going to take less away. So I'm still removing the marks, the grit marks from the 80 grit. And you can see even finer grit marks appearing from the 120. And you can see that it's taking away a lot less. There's a lot less dust coming off of here. So you do need to make sure that you are still wearing a mask, though. Alrighty. So once I'm at a point where I've gotten rid of the 80 grit marks, it's time to move on to 220. Now this 220 is actually wet or dry sandpaper. So I could actually use this with water and I wouldn't have to wear a mask. But I'm going to go ahead and keep sanding it dry. Since I have a mask on already. Alrighty, so the 220 is going to get rid of a lot of those grit marks. And it should be actually a lot faster to get through everything if you are working in the proper order. I'm starting to feel the surface is getting really smooth. And I'm not seeing grit marks anymore, although they are still there. I'm going to move on to a 400. Now this is wet sandpaper, so I'm going to go ahead. This is meant to be sanded wet, so I'm going to go ahead and put some water on it. And I'm going to work on this. One thing you may see is that with this sandpaper, some of the grit's coming off and it's changing the color a little bit. Let me go ahead. This is 400, so it's going to make it super duper smooth. It's not necessarily going to make it shiny though. And you can see the grooves that I kind of just let go. I just kind of left them there. You can see where those are. So I should have kept going with the 80 to get rid of those completely. And if I did go back to the 80, I'd have to go back through the steps again. So that's why it's important not to move on until you are totally ready. And this is feeling pretty good. Sometimes it can be hard to tell with the grit on there. You can go rinse it off if you want to. I'm actually going to go rinse it real fast for my next one. And you can see all that grit does wash off. So if you're using a darker sandpaper and it's making the grit appear on there, it's not something that'll stain it forever and ever. You can always rinse it off. You can use a toothbrush too to get it out of some of these finer grooves. All right, so it's feeling pretty good. I feel a little bit of a mark right here. I'm just going to go over that real fast. And it's feeling really nice. Now, in my instructions on the assignment, I say that you can stop at 400 and move on to waxing, which I will have a separate video up for that. But if you have a finer grit, like 1000, you could also do 1000 grit and you will get almost like a shinier look to your clay. If you keep going with this sandpaper, keep going up and up and up to, 4,000, 8,000. You're using polishing compound. You can end up with something that even looks glossy, like it's been glazed. So, don't be afraid to keep working up the scale and trying out polishing compound. Really giving these a go, because that's how you would be polishing, stone. I know this is ceramic stone, but it's also how you would polish things like marble and stuff. So you can try that out. This is starting to feel really smooth. You can feel the difference really clearly on this. I would strongly suggest that you rinse it before you start working with wax. So I'm going to do a little more. Ooh, it's starting to peel into the sandpaper. Alrighty. And then the last step is going to be, on mine, the 1500. So I'm going to go ahead and go over my project with 1500. And it is so super glossy or soft now. Let me go ahead and wash it off. So I'm sure it's hard to tell on the camera, but in person, you can see that it is a little more shiny in the spot that I sanded. And then if you look over here, this is actually glaze that's painted on top. And you can see the difference in texture. So once again, I'm going to show you a quick video on how to stain this and then also how to apply wax to it. So thank you for watching.